Questions of Doom.
Hello and welcome back to another Questions of Doom. In this series, as ever, I attempt to answer questions that you send my way using the archaeosoup@gmail.com email address as displayed on the YouTube channel homepage, but also as you'll see at the end of this video. In answering these questions by video, it is my hope that the answer is not only useful to the person who has asked the question, but also anyone else out there who may be wondering the same thing. Now, today's question comes from a YouTuber and a friend of Archaeosoup Towers who actually for a while was at the back of the queue, or rather fairly low down the pyramid of questions. And actually we've been flooded with questions of doom of late here at Archaeosoup. Thank you very much. We will get around to answering your questions soon. But nonetheless, this particular question I thought I'd bring to the top of the pile because suddenly a gap opened up and I thought, well, I'll answer this one. So, this one comes from MacNuts2 or Mac, Professor Soup. Being an ardent proponent of the tobacco pipe, I wonder if there are any interesting archaeological finds regarding tobacco, pipes, etc., New World or around the globe. MacNuts2, aka Mac. Well, Mac, thank you for the question, and yes, it's an interesting question. And actually, I can understand why you like the pipe. I quite like a pipe as well. I often play with a pipe, so sit there pretending to smoke it. But unfortunately, I have a rather unfortunate family history whereby if I was to start smoking, it may well affect me in a slightly cancerous fashion, so I don't actually indulge in the pipe itself. However, I can appreciate the heft of the pipe, and also the sort of the flavour of the air, I suppose, that comes through. But yeah, sadly, I don't smoke. But it is a good question. What is the history of pipe smoking? It seems to be something which is almost ancient. You know, you look at someone smoking a pipe, you go, oh yes, he's from olden days, he smoked a pipe. But what is their history? Well, initially, when you look at the archaeology, pipes are everywhere. Clay pipes in particular. They're everywhere. You know, on most field walks, in particular in places like Britain and other parts of the world, they will come up with clay pipes almost all the time. Almost every field walk you do, you find at least a piece of a clay pipe. But this is to do with the spread of tobacco smoking following the 16th century introduction of it into Europe. It became very common. It became a field workers' pastime, and therefore pipes got broken and are found rather on fields or in fields. Indeed, here in Archaeosoup Towers we have two pieces of clay pipe somewhere. They're in a cupboard downstairs. Unfortunately, they're rather inaccessible at the moment due to, the cupboard being rather full. However, on these particular pieces of clay pipe, one of them actually has a very nice decoration of a harp, like the Irish symbol of a harp. So they're pleasing objects, and they're almost everywhere. They seem to be ubiquitous. And actually, there are people who specialise in clay pipe studies. There's a fantastic essay which I'll put a link to in the underbar below, which examines not only the current uses of pipes, but also how pipe and pipe smoking may be studied archaeologically as the years go by. So well worth a read if you're interested. However, despite the fact that clay pipes post 16th century are crazily common, it seems, uncommonly common. Before then, pipe smoking and indeed tobacco smoking, more specifically in the rest of the world, or rather in the old world, is uncommon and very thin on the ground. There is some anecdotal evidence of smoking-like activities. For example, Hippocrates supposedly prescribed the inhalation of smoke for certain so-called female illnesses. Now, what those illnesses might be, not sure. It may well be cramps, that kind of thing. Though, unfortunately, I can't actually find a good reference for this, so don't take that as writ. Although it is entirely plausible, in as much as he did prescribe the inhalation of steam, for example, for agitated throats, this kind of thing. But so that's a possibility. And Herodotus certainly describes how the Scythians used to not only make clothes out of hemp, but would surround themselves in the smoke of the hemp weed and breathe it in. That's around about 500 BC. Lots of people like to think that the Saxons smoked pipes. Actually, they probably actually drawing upon the imagery from the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit and the Silmarillion, etc. They like to imagine that folk about 1,000 years ago in Northern Europe smoked a pipe, much like Gandalf. But evidence for that is near non-existent, and I suspect that's actually more linked with the romance of the pipe, hence the reason why I like toying with the pipe, than it is to do with actual fact. There are occasionally, you'll hear archaeologists saying, well, we found a Saxon pipe, and people get very excited, but often this turns out to be a composite part of a larger object, or simply it can't be proven that it was used for smoking, whatever this object is. So as far as that goes, as far as I'm concerned, Saxons and Vikings didn't necessarily smoke. Having said that, they probably would have come across smoking-like activities in the Byzantine Empire and beyond. And indeed, before the introduction of tobacco into the Old World, into the Middle East, the smoking of cannabis essentially was fairly common, using pipes not unlike a modern shisha pipe. Cannabis smoking was also introduced into other parts of the world, including sub-Saharan Africa in the 13th century by traders. This type of smoking, this form of smoking, one suspects was similar to the Scythian form, where it seems to be smoking out of a bowl as opposed to a pipe. So again, we're not talking about tobacco smoking, we're not talking about pipe smoking, but it is smoke that's being inhaled. It's burned residue, I guess, that's being inhaled and for one reason or another. Now, pipes proper, as you quite rightly suspected in your question, Mac, do seem to have their inception and their true history in Native American cultures. There's a strong tradition in certainly northern Native American cultures, as it were, of pipe smoking. The most famous example being the so-called peace pipe. If you watch a western from a certain era, there's almost always a scene where the hero is in a tent, or in a teepee rather, smoking a peace pipe, passing it around with the elders and warning of an impending cavalry charge on this helpless village. In terms of pipes proper, it seems that they start to appear, or rather have their origin in the New World, in America, in the Americas. Tobacco was introduced into Europe, as I say, in the 16th century and spread like wildfire, the so-called golden crop, as it were. However, when people first arrived in the New World, conquistadors, etc., they report coming across priests and the like who are smoking or inhaling smoke and are getting themselves into a frenzied intoxication. So it may indicate that actually they're not just smoking tobacco, they may well be adding something like our Scythian friends to the mix. Now there's a great book actually that I came across a few years ago. Unfortunately, I don't actually own a copy here, but it's called Smoking and Culture: Archaeology, Tobacco Pipes, and Eastern North America, from 2005. It's well worth a look. It examines the cultural implications of smoking and the history thereof, and yes, it's well worth anyone's time if you're interested in this particular aspect of human history. Now, recently, archaeologists did actually find some concrete evidence that the Mayans had access to tobacco. There have been written references that aren't necessarily entirely clear. There's also been occasionally imagery where it looks like someone's smoking something, but what could this be? But in 2012, in January 2012, the 11th there or thereabouts, archaeologists uncovered a pot which seems to have been used for storing tobacco. And actually on the side it had written in hieroglyphs, the house of its, his or her tobacco. So it's a storage jar with the residue inside. It had tobacco written on the outside, it had tobacco drawn on the outside, and therefore there's some evidence that Mesoamerican cultures, or more specifically the Mayans, were at the very least storing tobacco, most likely for consumption. And this probably fits in with those other references, so therefore possibly pipe smoking too. Now, some of the first cash crops, I suppose, of tobacco, which were brought over to Europe, were founded in the 1600s. John Rolfe famously set up essentially set up Jamestown, I guess, on this economy. And really from there, the history of smoking is fairly infamous. By the time you get to, for example, 19th century China, the authorities are actually they're condemning this activity as being unhealthy, worse than neglecting archery training, for example. When you look at, for example, religious leaders, they all react against smoking, saying that again it's bad, it's a distraction from, in some ways, church, but also just they suspect it's unhealthy. But this also leads as well to another form of smoking, which is the opium trade, where Britain has one of its darkest periods of its entire history, really, where we essentially become international drug peddlers, and where we're selling opium to China in return for tea. And when they don't want it anymore because they realise that they're becoming dangerously addicted to opium, we essentially fight them. There's the Opium Wars, and we take possession of Hong Kong for many years. So so there's the history of smoking of various substances. It has a very checkered reputation, a checkered past. But to answer your question in brief, Mac, the evidence for pipes and tobacco smoking really takes off from the 16th century onwards. There is now increasingly more and more evidence for actual smoking of tobacco in Mesoamerican cultures prior to that. And this evidence is likely to continue to be added to. When it does arrive in Europe, the clay pipe in particular becomes a near universal find on field walks around, in particular around Europe. So so there you go. The archaeology of smoking is slightly thin on the ground before the 16th century, strangely enough, but after that it's pretty much everywhere. Well, there you go. If you have anything that you'd like to add to this particular stream of thought with regards to smoking, please do feel free to comment below. I'm sure Matt would love to know. I know I certainly would. If you have any other references or any other thoughts about the history of pipe smoking or tobacco smoking. I will be doing another video, actually, another question of doom with regards to specifically hemp and cannabis smoking in the past, because I have been asked specifically about what is the evidence for that. So I will be, but if you have any thoughts on those aspects of smoking as well, please do comment below. Although, obviously, with regards to history, I don't really want to hear about whether or not cannabis should be legalised, etc., because that's not a debate for here. That's a debate for elsewhere. So there you go. Thanks again for asking the question, Mac. Hopefully, I've gone some way to answering it. I did do scouring through my library here, and I had a look at certain essays and things online, and did my best. So. But it just seems that, before the 16th century, thin on the ground. Anyway, until next time, bye-bye.